What are some other items completed during the planning stage? Well, we discussed how there is the brainstorming session, and that's involving the audit team. If it wasn't clear, we don't have the client in that brainstorming session. We wouldn't want the client knowing what we're going to look for, and the whole point here, we're investigating. We do not want the client involved there. But what are some other items that are completed during the planning stage? We want to obtain an understanding of the client's industry and their business, touring the facilities, understanding how they conduct their business. Are they a pharmaceutical company? Well, do we understand how the pharmaceutical industry works? What are inherent risks in the pharmaceutical industry? Are they a toy company? What are some risks? We want to understand. If you don't understand the seasonality of toy sales and that around the holidays toy sales peak, well, I mean, inherently we all, I assume, know that. But if you didn't, for example, that would be critically important to know. Critically important. Why their sales are fluctuating during a certain point, especially with that much of an increase, that would be very important. Manufacturing company furniture, understanding that maybe the lumber prices fluctuating affects their profitability. Understanding all of these components are going to help you, and management could tell you these things, right? But it's important to know these going in. So you are as knowledgeable as possible, and you can't be swayed by management. Now, of course, you double check everything management says through audit testing, but understanding how maybe they are heavily reliant on leases. We want to understand the current policies for accounting for leases. I mean, that was a big thing that happened a few years back, the changes in leasing standards. We want to review AICPA auditing guidelines for the industry. We want to interview client employees. We want to understand, okay, do they have a lot of factories? Do they have a little bit of factories? Do they have factories overseas? Understanding all of these moving parts and components of that business are going to be essential for getting an overall idea of how everything works. Analytical procedures, also wonderful here. You can do analytical procedures in planning as well as analytical procedures during testing. We'll talk about that in the substantive testing lesson. And analytical procedures are critically important because if you get a percentage of increases and decreases each month, each year, maybe we do analytical procedures and we see that the entire balance sheet is 50% higher, the net assets are 50% higher than last year. Well, just a simple running a formula would tell you that. And as such, that would be something to keep in mind. You don't want to wait till you start testing to figure out these massive fluctuations in how it works. You want to know, okay, did they take on a substantial amount of debt? Did our debt increase by 75%? Well, that's a pretty big increase. And why is that? We should have an understanding of that before we even begin testing. We also want to determine preliminary evaluations for materiality, audit risk, and internal control. These are all super important, and we want to go in knowing what's important and what's a red flag and what to look for. What's material, right? Going to be critically important. We also want to consider any factors which may require an extension of the engagement. Maybe they won't have their financials ready for another month. Maybe there's some ongoing situation. Maybe their office burned down. You want to understand any of these, and this could be absolutely anything. You want to make sure that you, just like in agreement in every stage of the audit, when you accept the engagement, you want to know what you're committing to. In the testing stage, assess this throughout the entire process, making sure that you have the proper resources and that this is feasible. I mean, if you've got a 415 deadline also, you want to make sure that the client's going to be able to get to that deadline. It may not be on you. You as the audit firm, you may have all of the resources you need. You may have all the people and the time. But if the client's just not going to have their financials ready by 415, that's a problem because you've got a deadline there. You want to determine to what extent the client's internal auditors would be involved in the audit. We'll see this going forward. It's pretty important that you work with the internal auditors. You see how they do their work. You ask them any areas of contention. You also want to understand if they're going to be of help. You want to know if they are doing a good job. I mean, simply put, you want to know if they're doing a good job as well, because that will essentially help you to assess control risk better, understanding that they have a solid control over that aspect of the business. Lastly, determine the audit testing timeline. Actually, we do have more items to be completed during the planning stage. What's the timeline here? That is also going to be important. All right, as we said, conduct that fraud brainstorming session. That's wonderful. That's awesome. Great to see that. We also want to create a written audit plan for the whole engagement. Now, we'll have this testing done by 3:15. We'll have draft financials ready by 3:20, right? That whole process is going to be in the audit plan. This is going to be finalized after the auditor obtains a sufficient understanding of the client and its internal control and business environment. The plan should establish specific audit objectives. Again, we're going to have cash completely audited by March 10th, right? We are going to make sure that everything here follows generally accepted auditing standards. We want to also make sure to determine the use of IT and automation on the audit. Are we going to use the bigger the firm, the more programs and analytical softwares they have. It's becoming more and more of an automated process, as a lot of you may be aware. Some of you are not aware. It very much is becoming quite the computerized process. Not saying people are going to lose their jobs. I think auditors are quite safe in their jobs, but there's just a lot more IT and automation involved in the overall process. We want to consider specific financial statement accounts which are likely to contain misstatements. Now, the examples here are just your classic examples that are even listed out in the AICPA authoritative literature. We have the assumption that cash is overstated, that cash may be stolen, overstated assets or revenues. Those make your balance sheet and income statement look better. Estimates could be completely off because they're quite subjective and easier than something objective like cash to misstate. And then understating liabilities also makes your understating expenses also makes your balance sheet and income statement look healthier. Lastly here, we're going to review prior year audit documentation in the client permanent file. Go over that in the documentation lesson. It's going to be super important to make sure, hey, did last year's audit team say, make sure this year you do something. Make sure this year you really check the bank statement because we had problems last year. Client permanent file is also going to have legal documents, rolling leases, rolling contracts that apply to this year. We want to make sure to check those out and assess them and take note of them so we can take action this year. Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.